personnel records review, one of the questions most providers want to know right away is how many personnel files are you going to want to look at? Well, that's determined on a couple different things. We're going to look at a minimum of 3 employee records no matter what. Unless, of course, you don't employ 3 people, then we'll only look at what you do have. However, if you have, our goal is to make sure that we cover every single service that you provide. So if you provide 4 services, and if we can find 3 employee records that cover all 4 of those services, and when I say cover all 4 of those services, that those employees actually provide those services within your organization, then we will only need to look at those 3 records. If those 3 records for some reason do not cover all 4 of those services that you provide, then we would need to pull a 4th record in order to get our sample completely full. The next piece, once we figure out which files we're going to be looking at, the next slide here is going through kind of some of the pieces that we're looking for when we're going through a file. First thing we're going to want to make sure is that the person's qualified. And these are some examples of things that you may want to have in your file to demonstrate and prove that the person does meet the minimum qualifications. High school diploma. All but about 2 services now in the handbook require a high school diploma. And they all require some level of experience. So you want to make sure as an employer that you have some type of system in place to demonstrate that, which would include your reference checks that are required as part of the background screening, but they also would help to cover this requirement. Yes?
Now, where can I find the information so that I'm sure that my staff meet all those requirements? How am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to know, my staff render personal care, companion, and respite, and you're saying that there may be different requirements for them? How would I know what those are?
Okay. How does a provider know what's required of any given service provider? Basically, I think is what you're saying. The handbook. Section 1 of the handbook is dedicated to each individual service and the minimum qualifications and experience requirements for each service. Section 2, just to go on with that, is dedicated to each individual service and what the service is actually for, and the scope of the services and the purpose of it. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Right. So for example, if you pulled up residential habilitation in the handbook, you opened up residential habilitation, you're going to see in there what the minimum requirements are in Section 1 for residential habilitation. You're going to see that the different training requirements, and we're going to get into those. Again, I have another slide dedicated just to training. You're going to see what level of experience is expected. You're going to see that in some situations a certain amount of education and technical school can qualify, can kind of balance out year for year as far as experience. You're going to find out if there's any other special licenses that are required for that particular service that they're providing. For the high school diploma, we're looking for a high school diploma or equivalent. It could be a GED or something to that effect. It could be a bachelor's degree. The assumption is that if you have your bachelor's degree, you would have had to have had a GED, or a high school diploma or a GED, because you cannot go on to that level of college without such things. Employment application, this is something that's recommended. It isn't required, but it helps you as an employer to capture a lot of really critical information about a person. It can show their history, their work history. It gives you the phone numbers and things on there that you can call to do your reference checks. That may end up being in the form of a resume. But it just gives you a good starting point. It also can help you identify when their hire date was, what their experience level is. Professional licenses, certifications, CPR, CNA, behavior assistant. We're looking for all of these training certificates or certifications. Not all of them. It depends on what service we're evaluating them for. If it's for residential habilitation, we are going to be looking for certification in CPR. We're not going to necessarily be looking for behavior assistant or license in nursing, unless it happens to be a special medical home care home, and then that is a requirement. The results of reference checks, again, I mentioned these earlier, those are critical, and they are a part of the initial process to determine whether somebody can even be hired by you as part of the background screening process. Copy of driver's license, current insurance, current registration. The driver's license is something that we use to help again, one of the requirements is that the person is at least 18 years of age or older. Driver's license is one of the easiest ways to demonstrate that. I know you might say, well, can't you just look at me and tell I'm older than 18? No, not always. Sometimes, you know, stranger things have happened. The DMV checks are a good practice, but they're not necessary. The insurance for vehicles and registration for vehicles is only required if you are, well, the insurance, the insurance and registration is if you are transporting someone in your own vehicle to provide in the course of providing a service. For example, companion. If I'm a companion provider, I need to demonstrate that I have current insurance and registration and license if I'm taking people out into the community in my own vehicle. Yes?
I have a question. I work for an ADT and I only transport people in the ADT vehicle. You're not going to be looking for my personal vehicle insurance and stuff like that, are you?
That's a great question. The question is, if I work for an ADT and I only transport individuals in the agency van, is Delmarva going to want to see my personal insurance and registration? The answer to that is no. We would be looking at the agency, the ADTs. We would want to see the ADT had coverage on that van. We would be looking at your driver's license to make sure it was current. But that would be as far as that would need to be looked at. Alrighty. More personnel record stuff. Is that the right one? Yes. Training. Training is one of the most diverse topics I think we have, other than background screening, which seems to be, they're neck and neck, I think, on any given day. When we're looking at documentation, we need to make sure that it meets minimum requirements. The handbook at the end of the core assurances states that the documentation must include the topic, the duration, the dates, the trainer, the name and signature of the individual, the name and signature of the individual and the trainer, and also the location. As those of you that have been around for a while, the certificates can look any number of different ways, depending on who provided the training and what the topic was. What we ask of you that helps to make sure that we determine this, because it's documentation, so if it isn't necessarily just that certificate as it stands alone. If you have an agenda, I would suggest that if anytime you go to a training, keep that agenda, or at least a copy of that agenda, with that training certificate. Sometimes the agenda is your training certificate and it has a signature and everything on it. If there's any additional information, handouts and things that you have with you as part of that training, again, keep that packet together as proof, because that, again, if there's ever any question over what was a topic that was discussed, the topic may not say choice and rights. It may be, the topic may be personal outcomes. But within personal outcomes, there was an emphasis, and they could show by the agenda that there was a focus on personal choice and rights. So therefore, that can help us to make a determination whether or not we can count that towards the choice and rights requirement. Any bit of information that can help solidify the topics and the information that we need is always helpful. Required training. These can be found in the Core Assurances 2.1, and the one on the left-hand side here are the ones that are required of all waiver providers. The handbook and appendices. Basically, the training, we want to make sure that people understand, or at least are somewhat familiar with the handbook. We don't expect anybody to have memorized the handbook. I've tried. It's just not going to happen. And it's not, it's not exactly light reading, but we want to at least make sure people are familiar with it, that they may have an idea of where to go when they want to find out what the minimum requirements are for a particular service, or where they want to go to see what the core assurances are. Choice and rights is training that's a requirement for the core assurances. Health and safety. Health and safety now, if you take the direct care core competency, now the new curriculum actually covers health and safety as well. So that's included with that, as well as infection control. Use of personal goals, that is another requirement. Again, most areas have something that have been going on based on the personal outcome measures in the past, and moving forward they're moving towards a person-centered planning training, and that is currently being rolled out around the state in different areas. We're looking for training specific to the service that you're providing. We want to know that you at least you know what the service is that you're providing. If I'm going to provide companion, I need to be told and educated on what does it mean to be a companion? Does it mean that I just go with the person and go hang out with them at my house and watch movies? Is that what a companion does? No, it's not what a companion does. If I'm a supported living coach, what do I know my expectations to be? What am I expected to do as a coach for an individual? So that's what we're looking at for service-specific training. There's also documentation that goes along with each of those supports services, which is also in Section 2 of the handbook. It tells you exactly what documentation is required for each service. In addition to having those documentation pieces identified, there's also an asterisk next to the ones that are required for billing. So if you're looking in that part of the handbook, this is Section 2, under Companion, you go near the end, you'll see a section that says documentation to be available for review, and I can't remember the exact words, but that's what it means. The second piece of that documentation, in order to provide documentation for reimbursement purposes. Needs and characteristics training is another one. This is the one that we get a lot of conversation about as well. What we're looking for needs and characteristics, if you think of it in terms of all of these other trainings, are the trainings that you have to get in order to provide whatever services that you're providing to people. That's what those trainings are for. They qualify you to do that. Needs and characteristics, we're looking for what is it that you've done to train yourself to serve Mary. What is it specific to Mary? This is where you bring it down to the individuals that you're serving. How do I know if I want to serve Mary, I'm going to be Mary's companion? How did I educate myself on what her needs were? Yes?
I have a question. I serve a gentleman who has diabetes. So I went online and I learned everything I could about it. Would that be needs and characteristics? Because it is about the person I serve. That's why I went and learned that.
That is absolutely what we would be looking for. We would be looking for you getting to know the person and finding out how is it that I can best serve them. This can be done via a parent. If a person has specific positioning needs or specific nutritional needs, a conversation with the parent. A lot of providers will gather this through an intake form when they first start serving someone. There's a lot of different tools out there online. The All About Me, I believe, is one of them. The Planning Ahead book, the personal information section of the Planning Ahead book, is another really good tool where it goes into gathering information. You know, what are my dislikes and my likes? What are my favorite foods? What are the foods I hate? Or do I have favorite people in my life? And those are just some simple ones. But they're really good tools, and it really is what you've done to help yourself be able to be the best provider you can be to that person. It brings needs and characteristics brings it down to that level. Zero tolerance and direct care core competency.